Hello and welcome to my storytelling channel. As a result of the response to my telling of the Ragman and Luke's stories of hope that I posted before Easter, I have committed to post a story approximately every week, especially during the pandemic lockdown. You'll find these stories on my YouTube channel, YouTube Philip Liebelt. If you haven't had a chance to look at that first story, I encourage you to do so. Today I'd like to share with you a story that I wrote a few years back. It's another Easter story called A Blind Man Sees Jesus Enter Jerusalem. Peace in the midst of turmoil. I remind you that the church doesn't finish its Easter season on Easter Monday, but it continues for several weeks until Pentecost. So it's still appropriate to hear an Easter story, a story which I've constructed, stitching together a number of stories from different sources. So I hope you enjoy it. Thank you again for your ongoing support. It's commonly acknowledged that the other senses of the blind become more acute. I'd long known this, but it was only when I became blind that I appreciated how keen my hearing was, for example. Now, as you sit and listen to me and watch me if you are able to, you observe that I am no longer blind. You're right. So, let me tell you my story. How or when I became blind is unimportant. When I did, I remained in Jerusalem, my home city. There I begged, because I wasn't able to work. In this culture, in this time, there was no welfare system, as you may be accustomed to. If you couldn't work, you begged. A good place for me to do that was at the main gates to the city, on the road that goes to Jericho. There I could receive money from visitors rather than relying on locals who knew me and had pity on me. It was there I sat one day just before the Passover, when many more visitors were coming in to the city to celebrate the festival with their friends and families. At the best of times, it's fascinating to sit at those gates and listen to the various sounds. The traders at their stalls by the gates, beggars like myself calling out for alms. And then there's the various smells of the animals coming in through the gates. It was fascinating to hear the various sounds and footsteps. On this day, I heard approaching me on the road from Bethphage that continues on to Jericho, a crowd of people shouting and cheering, "Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest heaven." It was adulation fit for a king, but the words were as those for a religious leader, not a Caesar or a Herod. I sat wondering who this could be and what group this could be that cheered him. As the shouting drew nearer, overshadowing the everyday sounds around me, there was a new sound, different voices. It was as though those who were listening and those who were fortunate enough to be watching began to express what I was wondering to myself. Who is this? So I was swept up in a growing crescendo, behind me echoes of "who is this?" and others expressing their own answers to this question. Ahead, approaching at a steady pace, a growing crowd sang "Hosanna to the Son of David." Within the crowd around me came the opinion that this was Jesus, the prophet from Nazareth. Some were clearly pleased, others were critical and cynical. Now, I had sat at that gate long enough to have heard many prophets and rabbis pass by, but none had received such a welcome. Among those behind me were some who believed he was the Messiah. Other voices, and I recognised some of the religious leaders, rejected this outright with mockery and cynicism. One even told the rabbi to order his disciples to be quiet. Then two strange things happened. As the crowd merged into one, there was absolute turmoil around me. But there was a peace that seemed to exude from the person at the centre of this uproar. I could positively feel it. Even amidst this turmoil, I could hear the clip-clop of two beasts. Sounded like a donkey and a colt, presumably bearing this Jesus. Later, he would be executed. And as I thought back to this moment after that tragedy, I marvelled at how peaceful and calm he was. Indeed, even entering the city, he may have known what was going to happen, and still he came. This peace clearly came from within him, and he seemed unaffected by the turmoil that was going on and pressing in on him and all around and surrounding him. "Who is this?" I said, asking my own question but joining in with the crowd without realising it. Now, the question did not mean what was his name, but what sort of man was this that attracted so many different responses and had such an air about him. The question, though uttered aloud, was meant for no one, a sort of out loud wondering, but a voice from a person standing very close to me spoke into my ear. The Messiah, the Son of God, come to save us. And in the instant of these words, an arm linked to the voice scooped me up. Come and meet him. Who are you? Bartimaeus, son of Timaeus, from Jericho. Do you know this prophet? I already felt completely at ease with this stranger. Know him? He gave me my sight. I was blind like you. Then I joined his followers and came with him from Jericho. That seemed to me to be a long story, and I needed to hear more, but the surrounding noise was too loud for me to believe that I would be able to hear it even if I was to ask. However, I trusted Bartimaeus, and his words gave me enough clue to suspect, to hope, to dare to believe what was coming. I struggled at first to keep up with my companion, then regained some composure when I realised that we were climbing some steps, grand stairs. I guessed that they were the steps of the temple. I hadn't been up those steps since I became blind. The sick, like other outcasts, being unclean, are not allowed into most areas of the temple. Can you imagine how I have felt being excluded in this way from practicing my religion and branded unclean? Besides, steps are difficult for the blind unless they are guided. I soon realised the sensitivity with which Bartimaeus led me. A former blind person knows how to help the blind. As we neared the courtyard, the surrounding sounds gave way to those of the traders in the temple courtyard. Sheep, doves, voices haggling, money jingling, all the familiar sounds of the market. It's a recognised part of the temple culture, but it's a beat-up. The priests and temple authorities exploit people, demanding that they buy their sacrificial animals at increased prices and exchange their money into the right currency for the offering at exaggerated rates. Both enable them to charge so as to make large profits. And they call this part of the exercise of faith. In an instant, these familiar sounds became a series of explosions bursting around my ears. I realised that the tables and chairs were being turned over, smashing on the stonework. Money was splashing on the ground and flying in all directions. I wished I could see. I might have been able to grab some of it. Doves whooshed past my ear in a flurry of freed and flapping wings, feathers flying freely. People were running in all directions and shouting. Released animals clattered across the stones, crashing into my legs as they headed for the nearest exit as quickly as they could. Probably could have caught one of them too. It sounded like Jesus was demolishing the temple market. Then I heard his voice for the first time. It was clear, it was angry, it was resolute. And yet it was more composed than the turmoil around us. It is written, "My house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Again, there was too much in here for me to absorb it all. But two words struck me. My house. Who calls the temple my house? Was Bartimaeus right? Was this man Jesus laying claim to be the Messiah? My heart had been racing since Bartimaeus had taken me by the arm. The world all around me was racing too, and so were my thoughts. Too much had happened all at once. I was almost thankful I couldn't see it all as well. But then I was aware that Bartimaeus was still guiding me. We had walked through the chaos of the temple dismantling. The pandemonium unleashed by the market's demise continued to burst around me, but was beginning to recede as I was guided away from it. I sensed I was being led into a smaller room and drawn into the presence of a small circle of peace. Once more it emanated from one person in that group, and whilst there was chatter amongst the others, even these were respecting the presence of that person. I didn't need to know who it was. It was Jesus. It had to be Jesus. Bartimaeus spoke to him. "Teacher, let this man see again. Give him the gift that you gave me." "Well done, my child," he said to Bartimaeus. "Thank you for bringing him to me." And he said to me, "Receive your sight and go in peace." I felt his warm gaze I saw were his warm, dark eyes looking into mine, the mirrors of the soul. I felt a peace within me that I could not understand, and the turmoil of the world, of my world, seemed a long way away, and that peace has remained with me, even though in the coming days I watched with Bartimaeus, with our newly found sight, when Jesus was cruelly executed. At the foot of the cross I wished I could not see again, and yet I knew the peace would remain, a victory would be won, and it was. That peace was the peace that I sensed in Jesus when he first passed me on the road. It was the peace he must have had within him to be able to forgive those who drove the nails into his hands and feet. It's the peace of God that is beyond all understanding, and I wish it upon you, and pray that the whole world may know it also. Furthermore, his followers told me that he had prophesied that after his death he would indeed rise again, although they admitted they didn't understand this or even believe it at first, initially. Knowing this would happen may have been why he had that peace. And I thought at the time, that's something I'd like to see. Not thinking for one moment that I actually would see it. Still, I was amazed to hear in the week that followed his death and burial that he had indeed been raised from the dead, and had been seen first by the women and then by the 12 and other followers. But then I quickly remembered that he